Good afternoon. Welcome back. This is the Joe Gaither Show on SpursCentral, part of San Antonio Spurs on SI. You guys can check us out at SAS on SI on the Twitter machine. We appreciate everybody who's watching us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. You're checking us out at Joe Gaither6 or on the San Antonio SpursCentral YouTube channel. We're going to have a lot of fun hanging out with our friend Matt Guzman, who you already follow at MattGZMan on the Twitter machine. Last week, we had our first standalone episode. We're going into episode 2, and it's been a very busy time for the San Antonio Spurs. Yeah, the basketball season ended a couple of weeks ago, crowning the Boston Celtics. Congratulations to them. But the Spurs have been moving and been making lots of moves. They obviously drafted Stephon Castle. They drafted Harrison Ingram and a young man out of Spain. So we talked about the draft class last week, but they're not done making moves. But before we do that, Matt Guzman, how are we doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. It's always a pleasure to be on the show. I'm excited to talk some Spurs. It's been quite a lot of content lately, which is always nice in the offseason. That is the magic word of the offseason, is having content to talk about.
Absolutely. We're very excited about this week. You pumped up for 4th of July? You a big 4th of July guy?
Absolutely. Well, this is going to be my first one, not in Texas, actually. So I'll have to see what things are like over in Kansas City and check out some fireworks shows. I hear Union Station's got a good gig set up, so we'll see. But, I mean, I've seen there's some rain in the forecast. Hopefully it doesn't impact us too much over here. But either way, 4th of July is always fun.
Well, we're excited about, getting into July, and 4th of July always kicks it off. So that's going to be a lot of fun tomorrow. We hope all our viewers and listeners enjoy a safe and happy 4th of July. Keep all your digits. If you're setting off the fireworks, be very, very careful about that. You want to talk some Spurs? The Spurs have been busy, man, and I know you've been really busy covering it for
absolutely.
San Antonio on SI.
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right, let's start with the biggest news. Free agency. Well, we'll start with two guys that were never really on the radar really quickly, as Klay Thompson ends up with the Dallas Mavericks, and Paul George, who is kind of on the Spurs radar just a little, ends up with the Philadelphia 76ers. But there was still a pretty nice consolation prize in Chris Paul. 20-year veteran Chris Paul agrees to a 1-year, $11 million contract to join the San Antonio Spurs. Just let's start right there with those three guys. Obviously, I don't know that the Spurs were ever in on Klay Thompson. I think he wanted to stay in a contending team, a championship contending team. Sure. But Paul George opting for the Philadelphia 76ers and then pivoting to sign Chris Paul.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think Klay Thompson, the writing was on the wall that he was gone. However, I thought that it was going to be to the Lakers. I think I would have liked to see him there, but at the same time, I'm sure, his dad will agree with me on that one too. But at the same time, I think that what he brings to the Mavericks is going to be big for them. Now, the only issue is the defense. He's not an elite defender the way he used to be. And so pair that with Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic, who have had their struggles defensively in the past. That's going to be one of their biggest Achilles heels next season. But they needed a wing shooter. They needed a veteran who knows exactly how to play and how to space the floor with other stars. So they got a good get in Klay Thompson, and I think he's excited for that fresh start. I think, like we were saying, I don't think that was ever going to be with the Spurs. He definitely kind of wants to ring chase. I mean, as much as he gets hate for it, he throws up that 4 any chance he gets. So you can only imagine he wants to make it 5. So we'll see if he ends up doing that with Dallas. But I think that was a good get for them. As far as Paul George goes, that was, as much as I hate to say it, I think that the Philadelphia 76ers are going to be really good next season. They've tried so many things since Embiid got there to make themselves competitive, and they just can't seem to get past the second round. I think that with Paul George, if they play their cards right, they absolutely can. Because he's a really great shooter, really great player, playmaker that doesn't exactly need the ball to thrive. That was kind of the issue with James Harden. It was James Harden came in, but he and Embiid both needed the ball. Now Harden's gone, you bring in Paul George, and so Paul George needs to understand, look, I can shoot, I can make things happen, and I can give Embiid the ball at the same time. And so if they can play their cards right, they're going to be really good. I don't think I ever was on board with the idea of the Spurs giving away as many assets as they probably need to. If they wanted to go for him, and they also weren't going to really draw him away from somewhere like the Clippers in free agency with such a young team. I think he was also kind of waiting. He wanted to bring that veteran experience as he's entering the back part of his career and kind of really go for a title. So we'll see how those two players do. It's going to look a lot different seeing them in different threads next season. But at the same time, Chris Paul joins that list of veteran players going to be in new teams next season. I loved that signing. I know that we have differing opinions on this, on perhaps on the player himself, but I think that it was a good. I don't think they signed him with the intent of knowing that he's going to be their star point guard that's going to take them to the playoffs. They signed him knowing how much they can get and how much they can gain from his knowledge and his voice in the postseason or in the locker room. Someone like Victor is going to look, well, he's going to look down, but he's going to look up to him, and definitely kind of glean everything that he can from a player who's been around the league for so long, who's so good at passing that they've called him the point god. Like, this is a guy that really can bring a lot to this team as far as knowledge goes. And on top of that, he can still play. So he can kind of tell you, look, here's what you got to do. And then he can go show you. Doesn't mean that he's going to take you to the playoffs and take you to the NBA finals, but he can show you exactly what it looks like to space a floor, to facilitate, to make plays happen, and to get people the ball. So I'm really excited about that signing.
All right, my Chris Paul story is in 2008. I was a student assistant manager at the University of Alabama, and Alabama goes to the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans. He's still with the. I think they had not rebranded to the Pelicans yet. I think they were still the New Orleans Hornets when he was still with them. And Chris Paul came out to the Alabama football practice just to watch it all. And I did get to throw the football with Chris Paul back and forth, me and about a dozen others. It was kind of just a big conglomeration where he was hanging out. And so, like, as a person, I think that he's a stand-up guy, great stand-up guy, and I have great memories of that. But I just always have felt, and please correct me, you're the basketball expert, but I've always felt like he's been overrated as a player. People always talk about, he's a top 2 point guard in the league. But you look at it, what is he? 12-time All-Star, 13-time All-Star. He's averaging his averages are great, but I just never have been a big Chris Paul supporter, maybe because of the lack of true success. Sure. And some of that is probably due to the teams that he was on in New Orleans and the Clippers. They were supposed to be, this is the Clippers' chance to get over in the Western Conference, and they never really did that. So you've already framed it. No, the expectation is not an NBA championship in the 1 year with Chris Paul. But what is the expectation? Is it, hey, we're going to be contending for that play-in seed? Because to me, the Spurs were in the basement last year, one of the bottom 3 or 4 teams, but one of the youngest teams in the league.
Right.
Is it realistic to expect the Spurs to take a jump with this move to, okay, we might be in that play-in range?
I think that next season they're going to start eyeing it. If they play amazingly, they're going to have a shot at the play-in tournament. If they play averagely, they're going to be just outside of it. And so I think the expectation bringing Chris Paul into this roster is that not only does he bring experience, but the relationship that he's had with Greg Popovich throughout the years, the two of them can kind of bounce off of each other. And it's, the Spurs have kind of preached this development season methodology over the last couple of years. The year before Victor got there, it was a development season. Popovich was like, it's not a failure that we got number 1 pick overall. Like, we were developing our players and they were getting better. Guys, even like Keldon Johnson, who was the best player on the team at the time, it was more about him just getting better and honing his skills and less about contending. And you add Victor to the mix, and people were expecting a 50-win team that was going to the playoffs, but that wasn't going to happen. Victor is going to be the player that he's going to be that franchise cornerstone, and he's going to get them to the playoffs and to the, deep in the playoffs. But they need some more pieces around him first. And so Chris Paul is kind of the first domino in that stack. Like I said, on the court, he's not necessarily going to be the all-star that's going to take them there, but the amount that the Victor and players on this, the youngest team in the NBA, the amount that they can learn from Chris Paul is just going to take them leaps and bounds ahead in their development.
All right, and so we'll talk specifically for the rookie draft pick of Stephon Castle. And really, we talked about it last week on the program. I love that pick. I think he's got a very, very high ceiling for just a 1-year player in college. And obviously, UConn winning the national championship with his help. I wonder if this move was less about Victor Wembanyama. And obviously, everything the Spurs do is about Victor Wembanyama.
Right.
Less about Victor and more about someone Stephon Castle can lean on as, okay, I'm going to be more of a ball-dominant player.
Absolutely. I think in the most extreme way to describe it, you could almost say that Chris Paul comes in, he gives them a year of experience in leadership and mentorship, and then he passes his soul on to Stephon Castle, and Stephon Castle kind of takes and embodies exactly the kind of player that Chris Paul has become. And And so I think that, the reason that they were so high on Stephon in the draft was because they saw his potential as a point guard. He didn't play much of a point guard at UConn, but because they had two 40% shooters, they had other players that could take that role and dominate. And he fit a very good niche. He was a shooting guard. He was somebody that could make plays happen, but he wasn't the primary ball handler. In high school, he was. And so the Spurs kind of saw that he's got that point guard DNA in him. And so they want to kind of mold him into that point guard that can fit alongside Victor and get him the ball and make for that point guard center duo. That's obviously going to look a little bit different because Victor's not a traditional center, but you've got that small and big duo that's supposedly going to just, mesh and gel and be the soul of that team. And so it makes perfect sense that if they want to mold him into the point guard, why don't we bring in one of the best point guards of all time? And I say that as like we talked about, the success hasn't happened. Now, I'm a personal believer that if he had gotten the opportunity to go to the Lakers with Kobe, he probably would have won a championship.
Sure, absolutely.
But it's that lack of success that doesn't exactly, you don't think of him when you think of the best players of all time. But as far as true point guarding goes, he's the best to ever do it. He's one of the truest point guards that there has ever been. And so for the Spurs, it made perfect sense that if they want to mold this player of theirs, Stephon Castle, into a point guard, let's bring in one of the best to do it, and let's show him how to be a point guard. That way, whenever Chris Paul is done and retired, Stephon Castle can say, I learned from Chris Paul in my rookie season, when arguably the learning curve is the biggest. Yeah. What he learns this season is going to be more monumental to his growth and development versus any other season down the line. And so if they can get somebody like Chris Paul, which they did, to help mentor him and teach him the ways and show him the ropes of being a point guard in the NBA, there's no reason that he doesn't take that and run with it. And all of a sudden, he and Victor are the next scary duo in the league.
We're hanging out with Matt Guzman right here on the Joe Gaither Show on Spurs Central. You can check it out on San Antonio Spurs on SI. He's writing all kinds of work for San Antonio Spurs on SI. He just finished up writing a piece about LeBron James officially agreeing to his contract. LeBron and Bronny both on the Lakers roster. You wrote about Chris Paul, but then you also wrote about three young players on the Spurs roster: Sandro Mamukelashvili, David Duke Jr., and Dominic Barlow. All three players were in the same little basket. Two of the players had qualifying offers picked up, Sandro Mamukelashvili and David Duke Jr. So let's start with those two guys. Let's first start with what is a qualifying offer. You wrote about it on San Antonio Spurs on SI, so if people who are wanting to check it out and read it, they ingest information better by reading, you can read it right there. But what is a qualifying offer, and why did David Duke Jr. and Sandro Mamukelashvili get those offers from the Spurs?
Right. So there's two types of free agency, obviously. You got the Paul George free agency. He was done with his contract. He was ready to go and really just, have a fresh start somewhere else. And so those guys are the guys that, it's an all-out war for them whenever that free agency window hits. Then there's restricted free agency, which is reserved typically for the younger players or players on two-way deals. They're not being bid for across 30 teams in the league. There might be a few that are interested in them, but because they're young, they give the team that drafted them or the team that picked them up and signed them to that two-way deal. They call it the right to first refusal. So if you extend a qualifying offer to a free agent about to hit the market, that means that you can match any contract that any team offers them. So we saw it with as we were saying, Sandro and David Duke. Both of those players were set to hit the free agency market. The Spurs tendered qualifying offers to them, meaning that there's at least a very small offer for, a 1-year deal, 2-year deal on the table. But to say the Phoenix Suns come in and they really want Sandro on their team, if they offer him a 2-year, $10 million deal, the Spurs, as long as they match it, they get Sandro back for that same term. If nobody offers him, then the players have the option to accept that qualifying offer, or they risk being, unsigned or undrafted. And so the Spurs really liked what they saw in these two young guys. David Duke Jr. was brought in midway through the season, but Sandro's been with the team for a couple of years. And last offseason, the question was, do they re-sign him? And they did. They wanted to give him a 1-year deal just to kind of see what things looked like. He didn't play a huge role, throughout the year, but then again, it was a learning season. And from what the end of the season was versus the beginning, Sandro was a lot better of a player than he was at the beginning of the year. In fact, I think he scored double-digit points in 7 of his last 9 games or so. As that backup role, he came in, brought instant energy. He's a fan favorite. Mamu sounds oddly, familiar to a lot of Spurs fans who are used to saying Manu. Right. Very different players, but they gave him a nickname and they like him absolutely. And so the Spurs kind of, I guess they saw that promise. I was personally upset about the Dominic Barlow because chances are they're not going to bring him back this offseason. They're going to let him walk. So since he was not tendered that qualifying offer, he's now an unrestricted free agent. So he can go anywhere he wants. The Spurs gave up that right of first refusal with him. And I think the ideology there was that they kind of wanted to pick between a big man, like a backup role big man, and they saw that their two options were Sandro or Dominic Barlow, and I guess they liked what they saw a little bit better because Barlow has a lot of potential. He showed that at Summer League, but when it came to the court, I think Sandro was doing a little bit more enforcing and a little bit more production. He was producing a little bit more than Dominic was when when the lights turned on at the end of the day. So I think that's kind of what their thought process was there. But I think that at the end of the day, like, I don't think Dominic Barlow was going to swing them to to be a playoff contender versus Sandro. So, they just hope that these players that they did extend and that they are going to want to keep and stick around will help them get to where they want to go.
All right, here's a dumb question. Did they take on and they pick Sandro Mamukelashvili because he's a foreign player and that's what San Antonio likes to do over the domestic player and Dominic Barlow?
That I'm sure that's not exactly what they were saying when they were doing it, but I mean, at the end of the day, Popovich has said he's actually said that there's no difference between, domestic and foreign, but there are a lot of sources that will tell you that there's just a different way of basketball that they play. Sometimes you can't even really describe it. It's just the way that they play basketball foreignly is a little bit different than United States. And so, at the end of the day, they kind of bring that extra like, oh, they have this one instinct or they like doing this better, or, this is what their first, they go to this move first or they go to that, it's one of those things. So it makes you wonder because, I think he might possess that little talent or that little thing that makes, foreign basketball stand out.
All right, let's talk about another foreign player that is on the San Antonio Spurs radar. He's currently with the Utah Jazz, and we talk about, okay, what's the ceiling for this year's San Antonio Spurs team? If the Spurs end up trading for Lauri Markkanen, I think you really should be expecting play-in, dancing around that play-in tournament. What's the likelihood of the Spurs landing Lauri Markkanen from the Utah Jazz, and really how well would he fit in the organization?
Right. From what I've heard, it seems the Warriors are the main aggressors at Lauri Markkanen, and so it's going to be it would take quite a lot to sway, Danny Ainge and the Utah Jazz to send Lauri Markkanen over to the Spurs. Something I read was that he's not looking so much for draft picks because they have plenty of those. He's kind of looking for a talented player or two in return for somebody like Lauri. And so for the Spurs, that's guys like Keldon Johnson and Jeremy Sohan. I don't know if they require both of them in a deal like that, but you're going to need to send at least one of them over for him. As well as a few first-round picks, and the Spurs have plenty of those. But they just got a new one with Rob Dillingham, and so I don't know how likely it is that they end up doing it. They have the assets that they need, absolutely. It's just a matter of whether or not they're willing to shell it over, because that would change things a little bit. I think initially they believed that Jeremy Sohan and Keldon Johnson were going to be core pieces of this rebuild, and so if they really do believe that, or if they think that Lauri would either take them further along that process or be better in the long term, perhaps both, is what they'd need to see in order to go for a deal for him. But I do like that fit a lot. I think that what he would bring to San Antonio would be huge, literally, but also, I think he would have a huge impact on the court.
All right, so if Lauri Markkanen, if that deal doesn't get done, and it seems like the Spurs, the Warriors, and several other teams are in Utah's ear about him, so it's hard to say it's likely, but it's on the radar. If
Absolutely.
That doesn't happen, will the Spurs be done adding players, or will there be a pivot that you can see San Antonio kind of saying, okay, Lauri Markkanen off the table, he got traded to the Warriors, hypothetically. What's the pivot? Are we just, okay, this is who we have going into 2024, or will there be another option to improve the San Antonio roster?
Yeah, well, the Spurs have never been, the team to say, okay, what's next? We didn't get our guy, so how else can we make a big swing? They're more like, if we don't get our guy, we're going to rock with who we have and we're going to develop them, and we trust in our players and our staff. I think ultimately, like I was saying, I think that if the deal doesn't get done with the Spurs, it's because they didn't want to shell in just the combination of players and picks that Utah was demanding. I don't think Utah cares if he goes to the Warriors or the Spurs. They just want to get the best return that they can, and the Spurs have the arsenal to do that. So if it doesn't end up happening, I think that they're just going to trust in their players and kind of say, well, this is our squad. This is who we have. Maybe they'll sign a couple of free agents that are, a little bit down the ladder just to kind of improve them in small ways. But at the end of the day, like, if they don't want to deal Keldon and Jeremy for Lowry, then they're going to kind of keep that core together and just trust in what they've got there before, because next offseason will be a big, I guess it'll be a big year for free agents as well. And so, depending on how this upcoming season goes with Chris Paul and just really developing everybody, they could be, in a position to say, well, we think our players are ready. We just need that big star. And so let's go see who's available. So I could see that happening either way.
All right, so let's talk about what you just wrote about, and it's probably the biggest NBA news. LeBron James agrees to a 2-year, 7.2? Is that what I saw? $7.2 million contract.
Well, it's 4 years actually.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. So 4 years. Was it 7.2?
7.9, but yeah, okay. That range.
So it's right there. And LeBron himself agrees to a new max contract. Just right. What do you make of? Okay. Oh, and I don't want to expose you too much, but you're a Lakers fan. What do you make about yeah, there you go. Exactly. So I didn't want to expose you too much, but you're wearing the Lakers hat. What do you make of all the conversation that's gone on? Okay, Bronny's not going to take a two-way deal. He's getting a guaranteed contract. Okay. If you draft Bronny, we're going to send him to Australia if it's not the Lakers. Like, what? And then, of course, he's taken with the 55th overall pick, and you've got him on the roster. Klay Thompson basically seems like he spurned the Lakers to go to Dallas. And my, limited mindset basically says, oh, he doesn't want to go play with Bronny and involve himself in that circus. And this is not, I don't have any problem with Bronny, but I just think that all the issues, the nepotism issues, are creating complications for the Lakers franchise and make it tough to really advance the franchise as a whole. What do you make of it, covering the NBA day in and day out?
Yeah. Well, I think the reality of the situation is that since LeBron James moved to Los Angeles to join the Lakers, he's altered that franchise's trajectory. He brought them a championship in 2020. And so that instantly makes the move worth it for the Lakers. I think they would have liked to see a couple more. He would have loved to see a couple more championships. Maybe they will, maybe they'll get back there. That remains to be seen. But I think that it's one of those things where when you have a player like LeBron James, with all of the accolades and accomplishments and everything that he brings to the table, the fact that he's still able to be as good of an impactor, as big of a producer for the Lakers in year 21 is just, it's unprecedented. And so, yeah, you never see second round picks sign 4-year guaranteed contracts with their teams. And it's a one-way deal at that. He's not able to be sent to the G League, that's not what they're going to do with him. You've never seen that before. But we've also never seen somebody like LeBron James. I've gone back and forth on this. I don't have any issue with the fact that they took him, because I think that there's an argument to be made that he has potential in the NBA.
Agreed.
However, I am also on the side of things. I don't think he has earned it. They've come out and said, yeah, he's earned it. We haven't given him it. No, they gave it to him. And the funniest thing I saw was when Rich Paul had said that if his name was John Smith, he'd still go to the Lakers. I was like, no. John Smith with those stats would not have gone to the Lakers. John Smith would have gone back to college. And so I have no doubt that he's got potential in the NBA. And I love the fact that they wanted to make history. I just wish that they'd admit it. I wish that they'd come out and say, we wanted to keep our star happy. We wanted to give him the chance to play with his son. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to, unless you find the next Manu Ginobili, you're not going to get much from a 55 overall pick. And so people were up in arms, and it's like, well, who did you think was going to be the next, who did you think was going to alter the franchise at number 55? And so I think they didn't give up too much to get him. And there's an argument to be made that he's going to be good in the league when he develops a little bit more. But it's interesting. It's an unprecedented argument because we don't have anything to compare it to. And so I think it's going to be fine. I think that Bronny is going to learn, and I think it's going to be great to watch the two of them play together. But they're not helping their case by coming out and saying that he earned everything, because it's only going to make things worse. I mean, the kid's only 19 or 20. He might even be younger than that. And so, it's obviously hard for him to be seeing all these things on social media saying he doesn't deserve to be where he's at. A good basketball player doesn't let that go to their head, but it's going to be hard to, especially with all the pressure. And his dad's been LeBron James for the past 19 years. And so he's dealt with all of that before. It doesn't make it any easier, but at the same thing, I think it's a fine. I think they'll be just fine with him on the roster.
Well, see, you're dancing around and you're nailing exactly my issue as well. Bronny yesterday at the press conference, no, I never even thought about playing with my father. That wasn't okay. Like, come on, just admit it. It's fine.
Yeah.
But my main issue is putting him on a one-way deal. He's exactly like you said. If he was John Smith, he'd be going back to college. And at best, if he's John Smith, he's on a two-way contract. There's nothing wrong, in my opinion, and maybe correct me. There's nothing wrong with a two-way contract. He can
Absolutely not.
Be up on the Lakers big boy roster a couple of games, 5, 12, 15 games for the year. They can be on the court together and say they made NBA history. And then Bronny can be on the G League roster and actually develop and actually get minutes. My biggest issue is if he's going to be on the Lakers roster as the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th player on the roster, is he actually going to get minutes to develop? Is JJ going to say, oh, we're putting him in over Dalton Connect, who is our first-round pick? And, obviously he's probably not going to do that. If he does, are you just punting on the season so you can develop Bronny? It creates he needs minutes.
Right.
That's basically what he needs. He needs minutes, whether it's in college at USC or on the G League roster or in the NBA. I just have a hard time seeing him get enough minutes on the big boy roster to make it worth it and to give him time and space to actually develop.
Absolutely. I think I'm right there with you. Because without those minutes in the G League, it's like, I don't know if their mindset is that they're only going to put him in whenever they're losing by 30 points or when they're winning by 30 points. Cause you put him in there, he's not even developing then because he's not getting real action. He's getting garbage time minutes. And so it makes me wonder, I think that's going to show just the lengths that they're willing to go for LeBron, because LeBron obviously, had a say in this. And if he wasn't who he was, they wouldn't have done all this for Bronny. And so, maybe LeBron has that much trust and he tells JJ, look, you have to play him just like you would play any other man on this roster, and maybe Bronny steps up and he plays exactly the way he's supposed to. He could do exactly that and earn his minutes. But if he's just raw talent that just never really seems to make a huge impact anytime he's on the court, then there's something that they've got to look at. Or, that's just at that point, LeBron has to say something either to JJ or to the front office or to Bronny himself. And we're going to have to send you to the G League, or we're going to have to, we're going to have to do this. We need a plan of action because this is clearly it's good. He's getting millions of dollars. He's on the mainstay roster, but he's not going to be sustainable if he can't develop. And so it's going to be an interesting test to see just how much they're willing to put aside. Like you said, I mean, I don't think that they'd fork over the season, but they'd have to make some big sacrifices if they really wanted to give him those minutes.
That's exactly where I'm coming from is I wonder what happens to Bronny the day that LeBron retires. Let's say he plays out the whole 4-year contract. Well, if he sat on the bench as the 12th and 13th man and only played, 2 minutes a game because of that, well, at the end of those 4 years, he's lost 4 years of development time to where you could be in the G League getting big time minutes, huge chunk minutes. And, you come up to the real Los Angeles Lakers roster 7, 8, 12 times a year. And, you and dad play on the court together. That seems more realistic to me. And, okay, I understand all the arguments about, well, if you were a father, you would protect your son as well, or you would elevate your son or promote your son.
Sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Nobody's arguing against that.
But there's an element here of, are you elevating your son in the short term? Yes, obviously he is. But are you sacrificing his potential to have a long NBA career? I mean, when I think about Bronny, I think, okay, he can be a 3-and-D guy for 10, 12 years. I mean, really be a contributor, hanging out, shooting some 3-point shots, and being a primary or secondary defender on a contending team. But if he's sitting on the bench for 4 years, not playing, only playing in garbage time, as you say, you're really, really hindering the possibility of having him getting that second or third contract.
Right. I think you're right. And I think that at the end of the day, it's going to be.
How does Rich Paul reconcile those two things? Is it all just about LeBron says he's got to be on a one-way deal, so that's what we're doing?
I think so. I think so. I think the fact that he was calling teams and threatening Australia, that guy is willing to do anything for his clients, especially LeBron James. you know, and it's just crazy. So I actually got a chance to meet Rich Paul at this Kansas City. It was an event that they were doing before the draft. So Brian Branch was there. I know you know him, and so Rich Paul was there, and it was funny because he was in the party probably for 10 minutes of the hour that he was there, because the other 50 he was on the curb taking calls, you know. And so like this guy is willing to do just about anything for the clients that he has. And so there's no doubt that he had a huge role in negotiating this guaranteed deal for Bronny. And I think in a couple of years we're going to see the impacts of it, because we could all be proven wrong. And like I said, he comes in and he does amazing, and he's just like, he does exactly what he's supposed to do, and he earns a spot on the NBA roster. But there's also that possibility that in a couple seasons we're looking at him like he's on an expiring deal and no team really wants him because he hasn't done anything yet. And he's going to have to go back to the G League anyways after that, you know? So we'll never really know what that is, because there's no other team in the league that's willing to go the lengths that they are, you know, with that, other than the Lakers. And when he's done and when he's retired, no team is going to be sympathetic for his son if his son hasn't really shown what they want him to see, you know? And so it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be a very telling season. And I'm curious to watch it. I'm excited to watch it.
Well, it will be coming before we know it. Make sure you guys are following Matt Guzman at MattGZMan on the Twitter machine. Make sure you're following all of his great work at San Antonio Spurs on SI. You can follow that Twitter at SAS on SI. Matt, before we get you out of here, what I've been asking all the correspondents this week on all the shows, what is the go-to 4th of July food for Matt Guzman?
Go-to 4th of July. I'm going to have to say a cheeseburger on a grill. Like, you know, I'm not buying it from nowhere. Like, it needs to be grilled, like live, you know, like that's exactly what I love. That. And then we always would get these things called ranch style beans. And it was like, that was the brand, was ranch style beans. And so we'd get them from our local grocery store. So the burger and the beans and literally anything, a Sprite. I hardly drink soda, but it's always the Sprite specifically with that meal is great.
I like your style. I love it. Sprite over ice, the cold Sprite. Oof, makes me very happy. Matt, we'll talk to you next week. There will surely be more Spurs news, and Summer League is coming up soon. So we'll talk to you next week about.
By the way, France actually just tipped off against Turkey for their first, I guess, exhibition game prior to the whole Olympics this summer. So Victor Wembanyama should be suiting up, and we'll have some coverage on that game when it's over. So.
Sounds perfect. Make sure you are following San Antonio on SI to find out how Victor Wembanyama and the French national team did. Matt, we'll talk to you next week, my man.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. That's Matt Guzman joining us. Lots of fun NBA topics to get into. Yeah, the NBA is off at the moment, but we are not. Lots of big offseason moves, so make sure you're following San Antonio Spurs on SI and Matt Guzman at MattGZMan on the Twitter machine. We'll be back to talk to you next week on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at JoeGaither6 and on the San Antonio Spurs on SI YouTube channel. And you can always listen to us if you'd rather do that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on Amazon.